On October the 31st, 1517, Martin Luther posted 95 big questions which he believed faced the church of his day to a local church door in Wittenberg, Germany. 500 years later, I decided to post 95 new questions, one a week, to the web, questions which I believe the church must face in the 21st century. Love God, love others, love yourself. That's it. The rest is commentary. That's Jesus' summary of the Hebrew Bible's books of the Law and the Prophets. And, as I explained a couple of weeks back, from as early as the 2nd century onwards, in the experience of many of those who followed Christ, these great principles of Jesus have best been read and reflected on backwards. Love yourself, love others, love God. So this week, let's begin to explore the phrase, love yourself, with a question. Why does it seem that so many Christians struggle with such a deep sense of shame and guilt? A sense of guilt that they can never quite get rid of. The famous early 5th century theologian Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo from North Africa, had a huge influence on the development of Western Christianity. So much so that it's often said that we all still read the whole of the New Testament through Augustine's eyes. Augustine's early years were wild. We know this because he tells us so in his aptly named Confessions, a kind of autobiography. For instance, in it we learn that at the age of 19 he began an affair with a woman whom he never names nor marries, but with whom he had a son and who remained his lover for more than 15 years. However, at that point he decided to leave her in order to marry someone else, a rich heiress, who was only 10 years old at the time. But because she couldn't legally marry until the age of 12, while engaged to her, he took another mistress. In his book, he confesses that at this stage, rather than being a lover of marriage, he was, in his own words, a slave of lust. On becoming a Christian, however, in Milan at the age of 32, his life was radically changed, turned upside down. And heavily influenced by his earlier experiences, as well as by Greek philosophy, of which he was an avid student, he developed his own approach to theology, within which the concept of what's called the doctrine of original sin is central. The idea is that original sin is the condition into which every human being is born. A problem which Augustine lays at the feet of the first man, Adam, who disobeyed God by eating the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden and, by consequence, transmitted his sin and his guilt to the entire human race. Hence, we're all deserving of punishment from God before we ever take our first breath. We're all under the wrath and judgment of God from the moment of our conception. We're all infected. We're all born condemned already. Centuries later, John Calvin, one of the European Reformation leaders, who quotes Augustine more than 1,000 times in his own writing, picked up on this theme. And those who followed him slowly codified his extensive teaching into what was to become known as the 5 points of Calvinism, still widely influential today and known to us by the acronym TULIP. The first point, the very beginning of Calvin's theology, represented by the first T of TULIP, stands for total depravity. It's a deeply pessimistic view of humanity and, in my view, a terrible guilt and shame-inducing theory which has been and still is a destructive force for countless people. I just do not believe that the lens through which the God who is love sees any of us is one of total depravity. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King once put it, there's some bad in the best of us, but there's also some good in the worst of us. For me, seeing God's primary response to humanity as one of condemnation because of our supposed total depravity is neither true nor biblical, but the invention of a misguided and defective theological system. I believe that the Bible starts with original goodness rather than original sin, not just because the Bible's story starts with Genesis chapter 1, God saw all that he had made and it was very good, rather than Genesis chapter 3, which is of course the story of Adam, Eve, the snake, and what we've come to term the fall. But more importantly, because the doctrine or theory of original sin just does not sit comfortably with the flow of the rest of the biblical narrative. God is not wrath, God is love. And although it comes as a huge shock to most Western churchgoers, the entire eastern half of the church, what we know today as the Orthodox Church, never did and still does not accept this deadly theological construct which we take for granted. And more than that, even more than that, very tellingly, none of the Jewish rabbis, neither before nor since Jesus, have ever understood the Genesis story of Adam and Eve in this way either. But much more about all of that next week. So, till then, I leave you with two questions for you to ponder. First, why is it that so many good Christians struggle with such a deep sense of shame, guilt and worry about whether they're acceptable to God? And second, it's been said that in the end, our well-being is much more to do with our theology than our mood. Do you agree or not? And why?